In 1999, BBC Radio surveyed musicians, journalists, and historians and asked them to name the female voice of the millennium. The list narrowed and narrowed and narrowed. At the end, two names remained. The first was Tina Turner. The second was a Brazilian samba singer named Elza Soares. Tina Turner you know. Elza Soares, almost certainly, you do not. She was born in a Rio de Janeiro favela in 1930, married off at 12, widowed and abandoned multiple times, the lover and then the wife of a national football hero, the survivor of a machine gun attack on her own home by agents of a military dictatorship. She buried at least 4 of her own children. And in 2015, at the age of 85, she released a Brazilian experimental album that won the Latin Grammy for Best MPB Record. The BBC put her name next to Tina Turner, and almost nobody outside Brazil understood why. This is the story of why. Elza Gomes de Conceição was born on June 23, 1930, in Mocha Bonita, a working-class neighborhood in the western suburbs of Rio de Janeiro. Her family was poor. Her father worked, her mother worked, and Elza, like most girls in that situation in 1930s Brazil, was expected to marry young and get out of the house. She was 12 years old when she married Lourdes Antonio Soares, a man significantly older than her. By the time she was a teenager, she was a wife and a mother. She had 7 children with Lourdes Antonio Soares. 2 of them, the first 2, died as babies, premature, malnourished, gone. She spent her early adulthood working, raising the surviving children, and trying to keep her family alive in a country that had no idea who she was. In 1953, when Elza was 23, she walked into the studio of Radio Tupi to audition for a famous talent show called Calouros em Desfile, hosted by the band leader Ari Barroso, the man who had written Brazil, the most internationally famous Brazilian song ever recorded. She was wearing a dress sewn from patchwork rags. Her own children's clothes had been more carefully made. Ari Barroso looked at her and asked, with the kind of condescending humor radio hosts used in 1953, "Excuse me, lady, what planet did you come from?" Elza Soares looked back at him and said, "From the same planet you did, sir." Then she sang, and the room stopped. Before we go further, Brazilian music is one of the most underexplored scenes in the world, from samba to bossa nova to baile funk. If that kind of discovery sounds like your kind of channel, hit subscribe. You won't regret it. What came out of Elza Soares' mouth that day was unlike anything Brazilian radio had heard. It was samba, but it was also jazz. It was scat. It was raw improvisation. It was a voice that bent and broke and then put itself back together inside the same phrase. She was a samba singer who had absorbed Ella Fitzgerald and Sarah Vaughan from American records and turned that influence into something nobody had ever done with Brazilian rhythms before. She did not sing a song. She inhabited it, dismantled it, and rebuilt it. She won the show. She got a recording contract. By the end of the 1950s, she was one of the most distinctive voices in Brazilian music. And Brazilian music in the late 1950s was being reinvented every few months by names like João Gilberto, Tom Jobim, and Vinicius de Moraes. Elza was working in a different lane, rougher, more theatrical, more vocally extreme. While the bossa nova people were making music for whisper, Elza Soares was making music for noise. In 1962, during the FIFA World Cup in Chile, Elza met Manuel Francisco dos Santos, known to the entire planet as Garrincha. Garrincha was Brazil's most beloved football star, a winger with crooked legs who somehow danced past defenders like he had a different relationship with gravity than the rest of the species. He was the hero of the 1958 and 1962 World Cup teams. He was also married, with 8 children, and he was an alcoholic. The affair began that summer. The Brazilian press treated it as a national scandal. Elza was demonized, characterized as a homewrecker, a femme fatale, a destroyer of Brazilian innocence. Garrincha, on the other hand, was the hero. He paid almost no public price for the affair. She paid all of it. They eventually divorced their previous spouses and married in 1968. They had a son together, Manuel Francisco dos Santos Jr., called Garrinchinha, born in 1976. They built a life in Magé, on the outskirts of Rio, and then everything that could go wrong did. In 1970, agents of Brazil's military dictatorship machine-gunned their house. Nobody was killed. Garrincha and Elza were not directly hit. But the living room, the room where the children played, was destroyed. The family fled to Italy. Elza spent part of the early 1970s in exile, performing in European clubs, raising children in a country whose language she barely spoke. She came back to Brazil. She kept singing. She kept recording. The marriage was disintegrating from inside. Garrincha's alcoholism was destroying him. By 1982, Elza had had enough. They separated. A year later, in 1983, Garrincha died of cirrhosis. He was 49. 3 years after that, in January 1986, Garrinchinha, the son they had built a family around, died in a car accident. He was 9 years old. He was returning from a visit to his father's hometown of Magé. The car went into the Imbaré River. The boy was thrown from the vehicle. Elza Soares had now buried at least 4 of her children. Her marriage was gone. Her partner was gone. Her child was gone. She was 56 years old. She kept singing. Through the 1990s, she continued to record and perform, sometimes celebrated, sometimes forgotten, never quiet. And in 1999, when the BBC published its survey, the British radio establishment named her, alongside Tina Turner, as one of the 2 voices of the millennium. Brazil in general was surprised. The country had never quite known what to do with Elza Soares. She did not fit any of the polite categories Brazilian music made available for women. She was too raw for bossa nova, too political for popular samba, too old for the youth market, too uncomfortable for the magazine covers. The BBC understood her. Brazil eventually caught up. In 2002, a producer named Pelo Madeira and the singer Silvio Tancredi convinced Elza to record an album that reintroduced her to a younger generation. It was called Do Coques até o Pescoço, From the Tailbone to the Neck. It was bold, sexual, funny, and entirely her. It worked. The album was a critical sensation. Younger Brazilians who had never heard her now. Hip producers wanted to work with her. The country, decades late, was paying attention. The masterpiece came in 2015. Elza was 85 years old. A team of younger experimental Brazilian musicians, the producer Guilherme Castrup, the songwriter Romulo Frois, and a band of young instrumentalists, built an album around her voice that sounded like nothing else in Brazilian music history. It was called A Mulher do Fim do Mundo, The Woman at the End of the World. It was harsh, distorted, dissonant, abrasive, and utterly alive. The lyrics were unflinching, about violence against women, racism, age, sex, anger. Her voice, 85 years old, scraped raw by life, was the perfect instrument for those words. The album won the Latin Grammy for Best MPB Record in 2016. Elza Soares, at 85 years old, after a 6-decade career and a personal life that would have ended someone weaker many times over, was suddenly being celebrated as the most relevant Brazilian artist of the year. Critics from outside Brazil discovered her. The country that had once dismissed her as a homewrecker was now putting her on magazine covers as a survivor and an icon. She did not stop. She kept recording. She kept performing. She kept showing up at festivals at an age when most singers had been retired for 2 decades. She had a particular relationship with her own pain that she never softened for public consumption. She was not a tragic figure. She was a furious one. She had the right to be furious, and she used it. Elza Soares died in Rio de Janeiro on January 20th, 2022. She was 91 years old. The country mourned for days. Newspapers published special editions. President Lula posted tributes. Musicians from every generation of Brazilian music, from Caetano Veloso to younger experimental artists who had collaborated with her on A Mulher do Fim do Mundo, said the same thing. There was nobody like her. There would not be again. The BBC had not been wrong. They had simply seen her clearly 23 years before her own country could. Tina Turner and Elza Soares. Two women born within a year of each other on different continents, both of whom turned the worst things life can do to a person into voices that survived everything. The BBC understood that what Tina Turner did and what Elza Soares did belonged in the same sentence. The rest of the world is still catching up to that idea. If you want to hear what one of the most extraordinary voices of the 20th century actually sounds like, start with A Mulher do Fim do Mundo. Listen to her at 85. Then go back to her debut from 1959 and listen to her at 29. The same voice, the same defiance, 60 years apart. Subscribe if you want more of these stories. I find them so that you don't have to.